It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday afternoon within the discreet grounds of Marlborough House, where a private concert was being held for the nobility and a carefully selected list of guests. The soothing piano melodies, the shimmering candlelight, and the elegant setting led everyone to believe this would be a rare occasion for the younger members of the British royal family to shine in public, without the burden of royal titles. But within just a few short minutes, the entire atmosphere turned into a silent shockwave, and the one who ignited the flame was none other than a famous pianist, a man who had performed for heads of state and was particularly favored by Queen Camilla. Wearing a neat navy blue suit and his chestnut brown hair combed tidily, Prince Louis, only 7 years old, sat before the grand Steinway piano in the quiet room. With tiny yet determined hands, he began pressing the first keys of a piece he had practiced for weeks. No one present expected Louis to perform like a musical prodigy. Everyone understood that this event was meant to encourage confidence and spirit in the next generation of royals. However, a whisper laced with mockery from the left side of the room turned everything in an unexpected direction. The renowned pianist, nicknamed the Royal Golden Fingers, couldn't hide a mocking glance as Louis finished the piece with a few small mistakes. Then, to the shock of many, he gave a faint chuckle, shrugged, and bluntly sneered, "Cute, but maybe the boy belongs in preschool music class rather than performing here." The music hall froze for a moment. Distinguished guests, nobles, and a few royals tried to maintain composure, but their eyes clearly reflected discomfort and disapproval. Holding back tears, Louis politely bowed and quietly stepped down, his face flushed red and hands trembling. And that was the moment when little Princess Charlotte, 9 years old, who had been silently observing from the front row, suddenly stood up. Without hesitation, Charlotte walked straight toward the pianist, her gaze firm and filled with anger, a rare expression on the girl who had often been praised for her composure and poise like her mother. Everyone present sensed a sudden shift in the atmosphere, from confusion to tension. Charlotte, dressed in a pale purple velvet dress, looked directly at the man more than 5 times her age and said clearly and resolutely, "No one has the right to make my brother feel ashamed for daring to express what he loves." That moment, Charlotte standing in front of Louis, fists clenched, eyes locked on her opponent, was like a symbol of generational transition within the monarchy. No longer were royal children just meant to bow and smile politely. That little girl had taken action. And what stunned everyone even more was how maturely Charlotte defended her brother. There was no rudeness, no tears or raised voices, just a clear stance that silenced the entire room. Even the pianist could only awkwardly slump back into his chair, unable to meet the eyes of the young princess. That musical event, originally organized to raise funds for an arts education charity, ended earlier than expected, but its echoes spread across the royal inner circles and among the closely connected aristocracy. Those who were there recounted the incident with deep reverence, saying, "In that very moment, Charlotte proved she's not just a princess, but a new symbol of courage and justice." And now, the biggest question resonates not only within the palace, but also among the public. Will Charlotte's brave action change how people view the new generation of royals? Is this young girl paving the way for a new era? One where heirs to the throne no longer hide behind ceremonies and rules, but stand up for what's right, even when facing someone powerful and famous? What do you think about Charlotte's reaction? Did she do the right thing by defending her brother against public mockery from an adult? If you support Charlotte's action, leave a comment with the number 1. If you think the pianist wasn't wrong in giving honest feedback, leave a 0. Let us hear your voice, because perhaps you are the one helping write the next chapter of the royal story in this new era. Right after the dazzling lights of the hall had softened, the atmosphere of the ceremony shifted to an entirely different rhythm. Unlike the rigid and formal rituals often seen at royal events, that evening carried a distinctly familial tone. Gone were the rows of straight, velvet-covered chairs and the brass band opening the ceremony. Instead, there was the soft laughter of children, the scent of baked pastries wafting from a small kitchen corner, and the tight embraces of loved ones gathering for an unofficial yet deeply emotional occasion. The presence of friends and relatives, faces unframed by protocol and status, turned that evening into a truly memorable moment. But within that warmth and closeness, a vague tension quietly began to surface. Because at that very moment, all eyes were slowly turning toward a little boy, holding in his hands the sheet music he had practiced for weeks with his tiny fingers. Louis, the youngest prince of the Princess of Wales, was only 7 years old, and for the first time in his life, he was about to perform in front of dozens of adults. There was no raised stage, no spotlight, just a modest piano placed in the center of a cozy room, and a small heart beating strongly beneath a neatly pressed shirt. Catherine, sitting next to Charlotte, seemed to be holding her breath. This was not just an ordinary performance. It was an extraordinary effort. The bravery of a child daring to stand before others to tell the first musical story of his life. Louis couldn't yet play a full, complex piece, but he had spent many diligent weeks practicing a simple melody, gentle, a little clumsy, but filled with a sincerity that tugged at the heart. Charlotte was different. She wasn't just a sister sitting in the audience. From her seat next to their mother, Charlotte watched every step Louis took toward the piano. She said nothing, but her bright eyes and calm expression gave Louis an odd sense of assurance. No words were needed. Just that look was enough for Louis to know he wasn't alone. If he hesitated, Charlotte would gently nod. If he faltered, she'd purse her lips, as if to silently encourage, "Keep going, you can do this." And then the piano sounded. The first notes were still shaky, his small hands fumbling across the black and white keys. But gradually each phrase began to take shape, rounded, emotional. The room grew quiet. No one laughed, no one whispered. Everyone was immersed in a sweet and respectful silence, not because Louis played flawlessly, but because they could clearly see the effort in every slow keystroke. Catherine quietly wiped the corner of her eye. It was the first time in many months that she had witnessed such a warm moment amidst the storm surrounding the royal family. A 7-year-old boy who wasn't afraid to stand up, who wasn't afraid of mistakes. He simply wanted to share what he had learned, what he believed held meaning. Charlotte by now hadn't taken her eyes off her brother. Though still young, she had already understood the responsibility of being an older sister, someone who stands by her sibling, not just in play, but in important moments too. Some say Charlotte was born to be queen, but in that moment, she was simply a wonderful, brave, and resilient sister. Yet the question remained, was that warm, intimate setting truly a safe space? Or did its very closeness and warmth unintentionally highlight the invisible cracks creeping into the royal household? As the final notes rang out and the room erupted in loud applause, something unspoken passed through the eyes of a few adults sitting at the back. Because even at a family gathering, there were still scrutinizing looks, still judgmental whispers. A few mocking chuckles surfaced after the performance, not from the closest family members, but from the formality guests, those who viewed Louis as a prince who ought to be perfect from the moment he could walk. They didn't voice their thoughts aloud, but the mockery seeped through their glances, through their crooked smiles behind crystal wine glasses. And there in a tiny corner, Charlotte sensed it. She turned to look toward the back, her eyes unexpectedly sharp and cold, as if silently warning those trying to use the harshness of their prejudice to crush the innocent joy of her little brother. She said nothing, but the aura of a small guardian began to clearly emerge. The question now wasn't simply whether Louis had performed well. More deeply, people began to wonder, in a space meant to honor family bonds above all, could even the gentlest mockery become 10 times more cruel? Or perhaps it was in that very circumstance that Charlotte had the true opportunity to shine, not through dresses or flowery words, but through a powerful presence and quiet bravery. Amidst a crowd of adults, sometimes clumsy with emotion, it was that little girl who truly understood the most important thing. No one has the right to mock a child's effort. And as night slowly fell, the soft golden lights in the room still flickered faintly. Louis's music had ended, but its echo, along with the image of a composed Charlotte protecting her younger brother like a silent warrior, continued to resonate in the hearts of those who understood the true value of courage and familial love. What seemed like a simple family gathering that night ultimately became the very first stage where Louis voiced his own story, and Charlotte, without needing to play a single note, still made everyone listen. Right after the applause rose in the gilded hall of the palace, Where hundreds of eyes were fixed on the small stage at the Royal Music Festival, Louis turned toward his sister, his face glowing with innocent pride. He had just completed a short piece of music he had chosen himself. It may not have been perfect, but for that 7-year-old boy, it was a moment of touching a dream. Charlotte smiled tenderly, gently patting her brother's back, as if silently saying, "You did well, Louis." But as the stage lights dimmed, in that aristocratic silence mixed with luxury, a low and cold voice rang out from behind the curtains. It was a world-famous pianist, the guest performer of the evening, speaking to a woman accompanying him. They thought no one could hear, but Charlotte was close enough to catch every word. "At least he's a prince, doesn't have to make a living from this." That sentence wasn't loud nor spoken with overt malice, but it carried a silent, bitter sarcasm. It wasn't an artistic critique. It was a cold stab at self-esteem, not only of a child, but of an entire royal family trying to build a more friendly, approachable, and humane image in the public eye. And the one being stabbed was Louis, the little boy still innocently swirling in the joy of victory. Charlotte froze. Though only 9 years old, she understood very well the meaning of that statement. It wasn't simply criticism of technique or performance level. It was mockery, a degradation of dignity disguised in polished manners. And worse, it came from an adult, a performer who should have been a source of inspiration for young hearts daring to step onto a stage for the first time. Charlotte's gaze changed completely. Gone was the innocence or joy of a spectator who had just watched her brother complete his performance beautifully. Her eyes deepened, filled with an unusual calm and solemnity. Charlotte said nothing. She didn't turn to face the pianist, but her eyes quietly rested on Louis, full of protection and determination, as if silently vowing not to let anyone, whether a renowned artist or aristocrat, harm her little brother. Louis didn't hear that cruel remark, and perhaps he wasn't old enough yet to grasp the layered meanings behind the cold conversations in the adult world. For Louis, that moment was simply a small triumph. He had managed to play the entire piece he had practiced for weeks. Every small mistake was overshadowed by the rounds of applause and the proud looks from his mother, his sister, and the kind guests in the hall. After the performance, the little boy hugged Charlotte, his smile so wide his eyes nearly closed. "Did you see me mess up anywhere?" Louis whispered. Charlotte gently squeezed his hand and bent down to reply, "You did really well. Don't worry about the small stuff. To me, you're the bravest one tonight." But in her heart, that wasn't just encouragement. It was affirmation. She knew Louis was sensitive, sometimes easily hurt by harsh comments. And she knew even more clearly that if one day he found out about that cruel sentence, it would leave a deep scar. At that moment, a question arose in Charlotte's mind, a question that perhaps many adults have struggled with. Should she stay silent, pretend nothing happened, to avoid making a scene? Or should she speak up, not to stir trouble, but to protect her brother from quiet injustice? This wasn't merely a matter of one performance night. It was a raw slice of the coldness that fame can expose, even when facing a child. And Charlotte, though still young, was the one standing at the delicate boundary between easy silence and courageous action. The little girl didn't choose confrontation. She didn't react impulsively like many other children might have. But in Charlotte's eyes, in the distinct change in how she held Louis's hand as they left the stage, one could sense something quietly smoldering, a sense of alertness, a silent yet intense form of protection. And perhaps, if needed, she wouldn't hesitate to take action, regardless of who she had to face. Because to Charlotte, Louis was not just her little brother. He was the most beloved person in this cold and skeptical world. And Charlotte, a little princess raised within palace walls, but with the heart of an older sister, understood very well. Titles don't protect anyone from cruel words. Only love and courage can do that. Behind the curtain, the pianist was still shaking hands and smiling with the nobility. He didn't know that the gaze of a little girl had recorded every word of his sarcastic remark as if carved into stone. And perhaps he never imagined that, on what seemed to be an inconsequential musical evening, a young princess would begin to learn her first lesson about protecting those she loves, with deliberate silence, a silence not of weakness, but one stronger than any outcry. The atmosphere in the hall froze after the complaint of the middle-aged pianist, who had just turned with an impatient look and bluntly reminded Prince Louis to remain quiet out of respect for the art. Some eyes turned toward the 7-year-old boy, still too young to fully grasp the complexity of royal protocol, yet sensitive enough to feel hurt. In that moment, people awaited a reaction from Princess Catherine, or at least from a nearby royal aide. But no one expected that the one to step forward would be Charlotte. Without a hint of hesitation, Princess Charlotte stood up from her seat. Her small heels tapped softly on the polished wooden floor of the hall, each firm step cutting through the tense atmosphere. She walked directly toward the pianist seated at the grand piano, without the slightest fear. Charlotte's eyes didn't waver. On the contrary, they were calm and straightforward, so much so that the man couldn't look away. "He's only 7, Charlotte said, her voice composed but clear, each word seemingly chosen with care. "My brother tried very hard to sit still and listen. We came here to learn, not to be made to feel ashamed." The entire hall fell into absolute silence. A child might have chosen to cry or bow their head in apology. But Charlotte chose a third way, to face, to protect, and to do so with dignity, without the slightest trace of resentment. She didn't yell or harshly criticize. Instead, her astonishing composure was what truly unsettled the pianist. The man, long accustomed to applause and praise, suddenly found himself at a loss. He didn't know how to respond. Gone was his usual arrogance. He sat still, eyes lowered, as if realizing he had misspoken to a child who possessed a kindness that many adults could hardly attain. His silence only highlighted Charlotte's presence even more. She didn't linger, nor did she seek applause. Just one final glance at her little brother, as if to say, "I'm here, you're not alone," before returning to her seat. Louis looked up, his eyes glowing, while Catherine silently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, no words needed. The surrounding audience, who had earlier been reserved due to the royal family's presence, began murmuring words of admiration, not because Charlotte was a princess, but because she had acted like a true leader, calm, steadfast, and full of inner strength. An elderly woman nearby whispered, "That girl has the aura of a future queen." Charlotte's strength did not come from power or title, but from her empathy and resilience in every small action. She didn't need to raise her voice to assert her place, nor use tears to garner sympathy. Charlotte had used grace to perform a profound act, one that made adults reflect and ensured children were protected. Many people continued to discuss that moment passionately after the concert. On social media platforms, the video capturing the situation quickly went viral. Some comments praised Charlotte's graceful handling, saying she had proven that calmness is always the most powerful weapon. But there were also opposing opinions. Would a harsher reaction have helped the pianist wake up more quickly? Does kindness allow those who have abused their power to easily escape responsibility? That is the question many are still debating. But one thing is undeniable. The way Charlotte handled the situation not only protected her younger brother, but also made people see her in a different light. No longer just the adorable little princess in media photos. For the first time, Charlotte stepped out of the shadow of cuteness to reveal a potential leadership quality that even adults must respect. That story may be just a small slice of royal life, but it truthfully reveals human nature. In a world where power often comes with pressure and responsibility, a little princess chose compassion over sharp retaliation, chose kind words instead of anger. And it was exactly that choice that truly earned admiration. As the hall gradually emptied, the pianist stood up and bowed slightly towards Charlotte before leaving. No public apology needed, no justification offered. That small but meaningful bow was the clearest proof of the triumph of forgiveness. A victory that didn't need to be loudly declared, yet deep enough that no one could forget it. In the years of growing up ahead, will Charlotte be able to maintain that strength when facing even greater challenges, where not only the public scrutiny, but also royal backstage politics await? That remains uncertain. But today, that little girl taught all of Britain, and perhaps the world, a lesson in courage shown through kindness. The final question still lingers in many minds. If it were you, what would you have done in that situation? Would you have spoken out sharply or remained calm like Charlotte? And more importantly, would you dare to stand up and protect the vulnerable, even if you were just a child? And it was in that very moment, when the atmosphere in the hall was still tense like a tightened string due to mocking whispers and prying stares, that Charlotte unexpectedly stepped forward, without any warning, without any public preparation. No one to lift her gown or guide her by the hand, as is often seen with royal young ladies. Just a little girl with dark brown hair, eyes glowing with calm inner strength, and determined steps heading toward the piano. The audience almost held their breath. Even senior members of the royal family could not hide their surprise. Queen Camilla, who still held a faint smirk after Louis's awkward moment, immediately frowned. Charlotte sat down. She didn't glance at anyone, didn't ask for permission, nor needed an introduction from the MC. Her small hand rested on the keys, and the music began. Smooth, precise, and so full of emotion that every mocking chuckle before this seemed to dissolve into the air. Charlotte had chosen a short classical piece, not overly technical, but requiring emotional depth, something few would expect a 10-year-old girl to convey. And she didn't just play it. Charlotte lived in every note, from the first gentle glide to the climactic phrases pressed with her whole body. The music became a silent declaration that she was fully aware of what was happening, that she wasn't naive to the court's undercurrents, to the eyes waiting for a mistake, that she had seen her brother wounded by the cold indifference at the heart of what should have been their royal home, and she would not stay silent. The hall erupted in applause after the final note. A brief silence had hung, as if to let everyone catch their breath before a true emotional storm swept through. Charlotte stood up, bowed gracefully like a true noble, and returned to her seat as if it had all been completely natural. No overt pride, no excessive celebration, and it was exactly that which earned her even more admiration. International reporters in the back rows immediately pulled out their recorders and cameras. Many whispered that they had never seen a performance so short yet so impactful. Charlotte somehow had outshone even the famous pianist invited by the organizers, a man who had spent weeks preparing his main act. But the greatest change didn't happen in the crowd. It happened in Louis. The boy who just minutes ago had teary eyes from embarrassment was now smiling. Louis's eyes seemed to light up again. When Charlotte returned to her seat, she gently held her brother's hand under the table, whispering something so softly only the two of them could hear. Perhaps it was, "You did very well," or "I'm proud of you." Whatever it was, Louis nodded. Then he raised his head high, clapped once more as if to affirm he was no longer the hurt boy from earlier. His confidence had been restored, not by any adult in the royal family, but by his brave-hearted older sister. Sitting not far away, King Charles remained silent. He did not look at Camilla. No one knew what he was thinking, but many noticed he let out a soft sigh as Charlotte stepped down. Perhaps he, too, understood. There are powers within the royal family that cannot be forced, cannot be taught through discipline or threats. They are powers born from dignity, from resilience forged through pain. Even the politicians in the front row, usually cold toward personal emotions, leaned in to whisper among themselves. Some murmured that if Charlotte could maintain this demeanor into adulthood, she might well become a symbol far beyond what the public once expected of Princess Catherine. The story of Charlotte's performance spread like wildfire. Within just a few hours after the event, social media was flooded with images and clips of the performance. Public interest surged not just because of her piano skills, but because of her silent yet powerful statement. Many articles praised the act as a sweet slap to cold faces, a display of extraordinary maturity without the need for words. As for the guest pianist, once considered the main star of the evening, he could only sit quietly backstage as if he himself realized the spotlight no longer shone on him, because the center of attention, quite naturally, had shifted to the royal girl with the piano and a burning heart. Charlotte did not merely perform a piece of music. She turned it into an act of defiance, a wordless declaration, and at the same time a gentle encouragement to her younger brother. In a world where royal honor is often guarded by ceremony and authority, Charlotte chose music as her shield, and that made her different. However, from that moment on, a question quietly arose in the minds of those who followed the event. Was Charlotte's choice to respond with a performance truly the best option? Or should she have faced the situation directly, using her words to protect her brother and demand respect? Some child psychology experts believe Charlotte's actions showed remarkable emotional intelligence and situational handling. But they also warn that if she continues to choose such indirect responses, Charlotte may gradually form a habit of hiding her true feelings and avoiding confrontation, something unsustainable in the harsh political environment of the British royal family. On the other hand, some argue that at Charlotte's age, her reaction was perfect. She didn't retaliate, didn't lash out at anyone, yet still changed the atmosphere of the entire hall. That is a level of maturity not all adults can achieve. And with that act, Charlotte not only saved her brother from humiliation, she sparked in the public a renewed sense of belief that in the future, perhaps a younger generation of royals is quietly rising, stronger and more humane than we've ever known. But a lingering question remains, hanging in the air among the ancient stone walls of Buckingham Palace. Can a piece of music truly change hearts? Can a 10-year-old girl really stand against the silent forces pulling strings behind the scenes? And will Charlotte continue to walk the thorny path ahead with her piano in her heart? Or will there come a time when she too must learn to confront things head on? Under the soft golden light, the applause gradually faded, leaving behind a space full of lingering emotions yet to dissolve. While the public was still reeling from Charlotte's confident and refined performance, another moment quietly unfolded backstage. A moment without a stage, without cameras, yet no less powerful. The pianist, who had made Louis feel so ashamed he wanted to give up, was quietly approaching the young boy with a completely different expression. No longer arrogant, no longer bearing the condescending gaze from that morning, but instead filled with confusion, remorse, and a very human trace of shame. He bent down, reached out his hand, and gently placed in Louis's hand a carefully bound stack of sheet music. "You know," he said softly, his voice full of sincerity, "I was once a little boy like you, trembling before the piano, fumbling to find the first note, and easily hurt by thoughtless remarks. Today I forgot that. I'm sorry." Louis, still hesitant at first, looked into the man's eyes without saying a word. But then, as if someone had quietly untied a knot in his heart, he smiled, took the sheet music, and nodded gently. "I'll try harder. Thank you, sir." In that moment, one no longer saw a small prince crushed under royal spotlight. On the contrary, it was a brave little boy who had gone through his first real wound and chose to forgive like a true grown-up. Charlotte, standing nearby, watched every moment with eyes full of affection. She didn't interrupt, didn't overshadow her brother's moment, but just a light touch on Louis's shoulder, a nod of encouragement, was enough to make him feel he was never alone. Throughout the story, if anyone played the role of a silent hero, it was Charlotte, who did not get angry, did not retaliate, but chose to prove her point through action. Not only did she protect her brother in front of hundreds of critical eyes, Charlotte quietly guided Louis through his pain with her own gentleness and maturity. The entire hall seemed to understand that. The applause earlier was not just for the music, but for a new symbol of forgiveness, of resilience and grace in responding to cruelty, a 10-year-old girl with the heart of a queen. And it was also on that special night that the audience witnessed a clear turning point in Louis. From a hesitant, vulnerable little bum, he began asking Charlotte about how to practice, about finger techniques, and even eagerly shared that he wanted to learn another piece the following week. Perhaps not every song can erase pain, but some actions, like a sister's silent hug or a sincere adult apology, hold greater healing power than any melody. After this event, public opinion also began to shift significantly. Harsh criticism of Louis gradually gave way to sympathy and admiration. Many articles wrote about the rise of compassion within the royal family, praising how Charlotte turned a terrible situation into a moment of education and inspiration. A famous music critic on Twitter even compared Charlotte to a Debussy in the form of a British girl. not only for her musical talent, but also for her sensitivity and emotional depth in every gesture. And yet, one question still quietly lingers, one that no one can answer right away. Was the pianist's apology enough to make up for his mistake? Or was it Charlotte's quiet but profound actions that were the true turning point? An apology, no matter how sincere, is only the beginning. What matters more is whether true change comes from awareness and actions afterward. The pianist had spoken, bowed his head, and given Lewis not just sheet music, but a chance to believe in adults again. But if it hadn't been for Charlotte, who acted as a bridge, who preserved her brother's dignity from being shattered, would Lewis have had the strength to accept that apology? That question, perhaps, will continue to be discussed at length in conversations, in educational forums, and even in performing arts classes. Because this event is not merely a small royal family anecdote, but a prime example of how children should be treated, with respect, with empathy, and with the belief that every child deserves to stumble and rise again in love. That evening, as the royal family quietly left the auditorium, not a single camera caught their departure. But it was rumored that inside the dark carriage, Louis sat close to Charlotte, resting his head on her shoulder, gently tapping his fingers on his knee, a new melody beginning to take shape. And perhaps it was a melody written not with notes, but with forgiveness, courage, and eternal kinship. Under the misty night sky of London, the lights of Buckingham Palace slowly dimmed, closing a day full of emotion. In that rare silence, no one spoke of politics, thrones, or palace intrigue. Instead, the public began to speak of something simpler, the love within a family that once seemed broken, the image of Charlotte holding Louis's hand tightly, the look in William's eyes toward his children, or just an unspoken rhythm Louis tapped gently on his leg. All felt like a silent symphony coming to a sacred close. And perhaps that was also the most powerful message Princess Catherine left behind, even without being present on stage. Her presence still quietly resonated in every detail, every glance and gesture of the three children. Without needing a title, without needing a speech, she remained the heart of the family, silently supporting every step her children took in a world full of storms. If you also feel this, if you believe that love and connection can still transcend all boundaries, please share this video. Let this story of courage, forgiveness, and family be known. Because sometimes just one look, one hand holding another, is enough to create a miracle.